Teunis Brosens from ING Bank is an economist with an affinity for IT and digital topics. He researches trends in digital finance, innovation, and their regulation. I'm always personally very interested in the articles that he writes down, all the opinions that he's giving into the Dutch media, and actually about everything crypto. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Teunis, warm welcome.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, good to be here. So, and you have like a beautiful ING color sweater, or is this a Dutch Blockchain Week color sweater, right?
Both. Yeah. It's no coincidence, of course.
So great to have you with us today. Now, many thanks for joining us. What was the first moment that you got in touch with Bitcoin or blockchain?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't really remember exactly whether it was maybe 2015 or 2016, when I know a colleague back at the time at ING was forming a working group at ING from various corners, from tech to accounting to researchers, transaction payment professionals, just to investigate what is this, what's going on, both in crypto, both blockchain and crypto. So it must have been at that time.
Cool. Wow, interesting. And then you started within ING, of course, also exploring the possibilities, right? I mean, ING is, what I still know from your former CEO, really trying to become the biggest digital bank in Europe. Also focusing on blockchain. You also have like an own blockchain team, right?
Yes, there is a DLT team we call it nowadays, but there is a team indeed researching mostly blockchain applications beyond cryptocurrency. So they try to find applications or research applications of blockchain, for example, in trade finance, which is a very prominent use case that we have been investigating for many years. So there is indeed blockchain/DLT research for, let's say, applications in traditional financial services and beyond. And we are indeed also looking into digital assets, DeFi, crypto, what kind of services are possible there and what role could a bank play in that world?
I thought even that you already launched a first DeFi application. Is that right?
Well, that is unfortunately a bit of a misinterpretation by a journalist from citations taken a bit out of context. I mean, we are definitely looking into DeFi, but I know that there were some reports circulating on websites saying that ING was already in discussions with the supervisor in the sandbox context of the AFM. But we are not there yet. We're really not at that stage. We are really just investigating and seeing what's possible here. So hopefully later, but not today.
That's how it usually goes, right? With the news, they pick up like one line and they write an entire article about something that in the end turns not to be true. So, but exciting developments though. I know also that you're really proactively working towards, for example, DeFi applications. I'm always really enthusiastic about the thoughts that you share about, for example, stablecoins and also the regulation. You as an economist, you're writing quite well-funded opinions about the regulation of stablecoins. What is going on right now? Is there already regulation? Is there already regulation coming from the EU? We know from the US, of course, but what is going on right now? Do you have a short update on the regulation side?
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's going to be short, but indeed there is a lot going on, and indeed I heard in a previous conversation that regulation is not always clear, and perhaps that is the case. But at the same time, I think there are good reasons to consider regulation, in particular for stablecoins. In particular because there is always the risk of a bank run on stablecoins, so a risk that everybody rushes to the exit. And I think there is a good case to be made for regulation to guarantee that actually the issuer of the stablecoin can, in such times, cough up the assets and really hand back everybody the dollars or euros that they invested in the stablecoins. So I think there is a sound motivation there. if you look at Europe, there is indeed the market in crypto assets regulation. It was launched, or the proposal was launched last year by the European Commission. In fact, quite recently, I think it was last week, it was agreed by the European Council, which is the heads of government in Europe. And well, I shouldn't tire you too much with all the difficult governance of European regulation, but the European Parliament still has to converge on a view on MiCA, on markets in crypto assets regulation. Yeah. And then the three of them are going to discuss. It's called a trialogue. So we are still some 1.5, 2 years away from actual implementation. But what I find interesting from a stablecoin perspective is that basically they make a distinction in this regulation between what they call asset referenced token, which basically covers stablecoins that are not euro denominated. So
like Tether.
Like Tether, like USDC, but also like the original Libra plan launched by Facebook, because that was based on a currency basket. And basically the regulation, or the proposed regulation, says, well, you either have to be a bank, have to have a banking license, or at least you have to have capital requirements. If your coin becomes too big, then we should be able to ban it, or at least to restrict it. So it's quite strong, quite restrictive regulations. And that's also because regulators got, to be honest, quite frightened when Facebook launched its Libra idea, because they were afraid, well, wait a minute, here is Facebook with 2.5 billion users worldwide, and with the technical and human resources and financial resources to actually make this coin a success, which could basically put our own central bank out of business, right? I mean, if we in Europe all start to pay and start to get paid, get our wages in Libra, which is not a euro, then euro monetary policy, it would lose its traction. So regulators got quite frightened. So they are presenting quite strict regulation for these stable coins. For euro-denominated stable coins, the regime is looking to be a bit lighter. So there is still room there, but indeed, if you want to distribute a dollar issued stablecoin in Europe, or something like Libra in 1.5, 2 years time from now, then you're going to have a lot of supervision on your back.
Well, I can see from a systematic risk, I can totally see that there is an urge to really bring some regulation. For those of you interested actually in the MiCA regulation, as Blockchain Netherlands, we held a meetup with Watson Law. So we talked for 1.5 hours about MiCA. Willem-Jan Smits, lawyer, actually was speaking about also the implementation. It can be found at our YouTube channel if you're more interested in this topic. But coming back to the regulation, I can see, of course, that for now the focus is on USD-backed stablecoins, because when we're looking to the market size, well, they're of course so much bigger than just the euro-nominated stablecoins. You mentioned Libra. I think Facebook did a big rebranding game, right? It was now Meta, and then Libra is now Diem, and their wallet is now Novi. No, it's what? Yeah, Novi. Yeah, but it's interesting because Marcus, like the head of the Diem project from Meta, mentioned that it's ready to use, it's ready to be launched, but you indicate that it could take another 1-2 years before it will actually see the lights.
Well, I mean, the regulation. The regulation will take another 1.5, 2 years to see the light. Mm-hmm. And Facebook has basically, for now, given up, I think, on Europe. For now, they say, well, we're going to focus on the US, on US dollar-based DM first. And I think they are also looking with interest at the remittance use case. So, for example, like El Salvador now having adopted Bitcoin as a way to make remittances from the US cheaper. I think Facebook hopes to get a chunk of that kind of business by launching a dollar-based DM in the US and perhaps in a number of Latin American countries. So I think Facebook said, well, Europe, you're making life so difficult for us, so we're going to stay on the other side of the Atlantic for now, and we'll return in a few years, perhaps. Let's wait and see.
With a particular reason I can see from the EU perspective. I can talk with you, I guess, for hours about stablecoins. But another topic that you're usually having quite some interesting thoughts on is, of course, CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. Where we're making the split directly between the retail CBDCs for consumers and wholesale CBDCs. In a previous interview, you mentioned probably the first focus from EU perspective will be about the wholesale CBDCs. It will probably take another 5 years that we see a retail CBDC, right?
Well, I'm not sure whether EU institutions have a wholesale focus. I think, in fact, I mean, the ECB has very much a retail focus right now in the research that they started this year. There is a problem that I see, which is that depending on which policymaker you ask, what are you trying to achieve with CBDC, you get different answers. And indeed, some policymakers say, well, we want a CBDC because indeed we want to make life difficult for Facebook. We want to avoid a scenario where Libra or the new DM incarnation of their coin would become dominant. Or we want to have a CBDC because the use of cash is declining. And those are all retail-oriented use cases. And so you have to build a retail infrastructure and a CBDC geared towards retail use to cater for that. But if you ask other policymakers, they say, well, wait a minute, we see China developing its CBDC. We know that China is quite ambitious in its geostrategic goals. They have the Belt and Road Initiative. They really seek to increase their influence also in our European backyard, in former Yugoslav states and in African states. And some policymakers in Europe fear they might one day use their CBDC to increase their global influence. For example, they do contracting with foreign countries, and they could say, well, as part of the contract, we want to be able to use our CBDC in your country, and we want to pay construction workers for infrastructure projects in your country using our CBDC.
Yeah. So I mean, it will be launched next year, probably, right? During the Olympic Games, this ECNY, and probably then we will see a global adoption, maybe also with oil prices and so forth. Are you looking forward to this development? I can see that it is bringing quite some rapid innovation and quite some, some more direct steps also in the EU. Are you looking forward to this, or?
Well, I'm looking forward because it's extremely interesting what's going to happen. I mean, I think the first step for China is going to be that this is going to be a domestic CBDC. I mean, I don't expect them to next year immediately roll out the CBDC on a global scale. It's going to be domestic at first, but you never know if and when they would indeed open the CBDC up more globally. And I think that's so indeed. I'm very much looking forward to this. It's very interesting how this will play out domestically, but also indeed how China is going to use the CBDC in a geostrategic context. And it's interesting to see how other countries are going to react. I mean, you definitely see in Europe a sense of urgency in the ECB, among other policymakers. We have to build our alternative. We have to be ready. China has a 6-7 year head start. They started research on CBDC in 2014. And interestingly enough, if you cross the Atlantic to the US, they are much more relaxed about this. They say, well, they're still debating in the Federal Reserve. They're still saying, well, should we even launch a dollar-based CBDC, or should we just allow private stablecoins to compete among each other and let the best one win? So it's a very different debate there.
That's interesting. What do you expect from CBDCs in the upcoming year? Will it also influence crypto, for example?
Well, what I expect in Europe, the ECB is really in investigation phase. So we will continue to see a flurry of discussion papers and research coming from central banks. But honestly, no real development in the sense of actual launch or anything, not in Europe. We may see some further smaller countries launching CBDC. I mean, quietly, Nigeria has launched a CBDC just recently. The Eastern Caribbean area has launched a CBDC. The Bahamas already have a CBDC. Interestingly enough, there are now fintechs around that offer off-the-shelf solutions. They offer a backend infrastructure, an app, everything. So if you are a small country and you are in a hurry, you can just buy a CBDC off the shelf. And I would expect some more countries to do that. But among the bigger countries, it's really about debate, about discussion. How are we going to put a CBDC in the financial system, and while maintaining and preserving financial stability? And that's going to be the debate.
Off-the-shelf solutions. Do you know a name of one of these companies? I'm really curious.
I think there is one fintech called Bit with double T that in fact provides the CBDCs for Nigeria and the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank.
Yeah,
so that's at least one.
Now, from CBDCs also back to crypto. We talked a lot about blockchain, CBDC, stablecoins. How is ING and crypto? I mean, Rabobank already published quite a clear stance towards crypto. How is ING currently dealing with crypto? Is there like a general policy? Are you guys working on this?
Well, there are risk policies, and the thing is, I don't think crypto is a specific category that as soon as it's crypto, we block it, full stop. There's really a risk-based approach, which identifying certain risks, which leads to a certain response from our side. So that's from that perspective. At the same time, we are, of course, very much looking into crypto, but also DeFi. What services might we in the future develop? That's both a business appetite question, it's a risk appetite question, and importantly, it's a regulatory question. What is possible, what is allowed from a regulatory perspective? And here, I think banks, as well as other players, I think, are really waiting for more clarity. And unfortunately, indeed, we know the clarity is in the making with this markets in crypto assets proposal that we discussed earlier.
And clarity more from regulators, right? So really regulation, clear regulation about like what to do with crypto assets, stablecoins, and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, especially banks being such heavily regulated institutions, it's really difficult for banks to engage in crypto as long as it's, from a regulatory perspective, a bit of a gray zone. I mean, there is AML regulation. Obviously, we have the registration regime in the Netherlands and in Europe. But from other perspectives, there is no regulation yet. From an investor protection perspective, financial stability perspective. And that makes it, especially for banks being such heavily regulated institutions, really difficult to engage with crypto.
Yeah. Interesting. Now, we have a question also coming from the audience about the CBDCs. Basically, why do we need CBDCs? We're talking about, it's really interesting, and I guess you can talk for hours about that, but 2 sentences. Why do we need CBDCs, from your perspective?
From my perspective, I very much concur with the question, because from a Dutch perspective, we have a very well-developed payment system. It's, from a retail perspective, it's cheap, it's fast, it's instant. So that really begs the question, why? But the thing is, you only have to move 100 kilometers eastward and cross the border into Germany to be in a very different context, very much a cash-based society where internet-based payments are not as easy as here. I mean, you have to resort, for example, to PayPal. There is no ideal there. And so already there, the question, already there, a CBDC could actually add something. So it really depends on where you are in Europe. But from a Dutch context, it's quite hard to see the added value.
Interesting thoughts. Yeah, we are really blessed with, in the Netherlands, a financial system, as you mentioned, like Ideal, Tiki, and so forth. And the interesting thing usually is that a lot of backlash when it comes to crypto comes from countries that don't need crypto because we have such an amazing financial infrastructure already. So looking forward, you as an economist, of course, have a great view on all these exciting developments that are getting up, like also in the upcoming year, 2022. besides NFTs and regulation, the ECNY in China? What are some other exciting developments that you are following?
Well, I'm definitely looking closely to El Salvador, and I mean not so much because of the politics, because I think there are various good and some really bad reasons why the El Salvadorian president made his move. But what I find interesting and what I'm looking at is that we now have large global retailers like Starbucks, like Pizza Hut, like McDonald's, that are getting boots on the ground experience with Bitcoin Lightning payments in El Salvador. Yeah. And so I'm pretty sure that from their head offices, they're looking closely, and and probably in a few months' time, they will say, well, does this work for us? Is this efficient? Is this cheap? What are the risks? And if they like it, they might want to roll it out elsewhere too, because for sure the interest, especially among the young generation, is increasing. And so it would be a big, I think, a big next step for Bitcoin in particular, if, for example, such large retailers would start to offer Bitcoin payment services elsewhere as well, yeah, inspired by their experience with El Salvador. So that's an area that I'm really looking into closely.
Yeah, I'm definitely as well. So I'm really curious what's going to happen there, and maybe also some other countries are already discussing a potential implementation of blockchain as Bitcoin as a legal tender. So exciting developments. Teunis Brosens, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing all these interesting thoughts from your sides, from ING. Of course, you are doing this on a personal base, but we really appreciate that you were with us in the virtual way at the Dutch Blockchain Week. So thank you so much. Looking also forward to reading a lot from your side, all the articles that you're sharing via different ways. So thank you so much. Keep up the good work and stay in touch.
Well, thanks for having me.
Cheers.